Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me for a review today of the Hitoren V4. This is a saber that's new from Spartan Saber, also called Wonderforce. But if this saber looks familiar, there's a reason for that. This same saber is marketed quite heavily under different brands. Spartan Sabers, I believe, called this the Spartan V1. They still sell this emitter separately on their site. Spartan Saber calls it the Hitoren. Hypersabers calls it the Metal Series V2. YDD Sabers calls it the Fury. So far as I can tell, in all cases, it's exactly the same saber. Now, it's looked a little bit different from iteration to iteration. This is the V4. Most of what's changed, though, I believe, is inside. So, as far as I can tell, the origin of this thing is from Spartan Sabers, or Spartan Store, rather, and they are out of Asia. So, we're dealing with an import. So I'll talk about the design on this, the features, brightness, and just basic usability. So first off, a little bit about design. They sold this thing in 3 colors. Okay, we've got black here. I've added this grip. This grip wasn't part of it originally. I'll talk about why. We've got black. We've got a nice sort of Iron Man red. And there's a silver that's not featured here. Everything that's laid out here in front of me was part of their Kickstarter campaign. So some of these things are extras, some of them are available from various sites. Some of them I haven't seen become available yet, but the Kickstarter just shipped out some of the last of their product. So that's a little bit about the design. Let's talk about the construction. So these things are modular, which means that they sell various parts for them. I've seen actually a Suba guard sold for these, but in terms of what came with the Kickstarter, we had 2 pommels. One of them was sort of sealed with these holes right here, and the other one that came shipped on it has mesh on the bottom, sort of a chicken wire or close-knit chicken wire mesh. All right, so the pommels unscrew. Now, this is the speaker. I'm going to talk about this in just a second, but you notice how it's loose? One little spot of glue was holding that in, and the speaker is going to fall out. That's not a real big deal, because as you see, when you screw on the pommel, it locks the speaker right up next to the rest of the internals, so that's not that big a deal. So, interchangeable pommel, interchangeable emitter. Most of the time when you see these things online, they're shown with either this emitter or this emitter. That first one that I showed you is something that I hadn't seen before this campaign. I'm sure it's floating around out there somewhere. They also shipped with this angled emitter. Now, some of the emitters have little vents in here that light up when you turn it on. Others do not. Some have 1 set screw, some have 2. So, a little bit of variety there. I'll go ahead and put this one back on since it's the one the blade is in. Actually, before I do that, let's talk about some of the other things. Underneath the emitter, there is an optic here. Now, one of the things that I've noticed about this that I've never seen in a saber before, they're using a glass optic. Most of them use plastic. This one is definitely a glass optic. This doesn't seem to come out of there, but inside of here we've got 4 dies on the LED. So this is a quad-core LED. This is color changing. I'll look at that when we look at features. So we've got the glass optic. On the other end, we've got this free-floating speaker. Now, originally I said they held it in with 1 little spot of glue. Of the 4 of these that I got, 3 of them came off. 1 of them came off the first time I unscrewed the pommel. 2 of them came off the first time the saber hit anything. 1 of them I haven't really touched yet, so it's still being held on with that little spot of glue. But this is kind of neither here nor there. There's an O-ring under here to sort of keep the wires down and in place so that they don't trail around too much. But as I said, free-floating speaker is something that you see in Saberforge as well, so it's not a deal breaker. It's not that big of a deal. The other thing about the design, this thing is put together in 5 pieces. So there's the emitter that I showed you, there's the pommel that I showed you, but it also unscrews right here and right here. So just above the recharge port and just below the grip. And if we unscrew it just below the grip, in here we have the battery. It's held in place with some glue. I'm not going to take that out. But the battery is a big, I believe it's an 18650 is what they call those. It's a pretty standard lightsaber battery. It's rechargeable. That's in there. The soundboard is in there too, though you can't see it past the battery. But anyhow, it unscrews there. When you're unscrewing it there, you have to be careful not to pinch the speaker wires. There's really no reason to unscrew it there, so why they didn't seal those threads, I'm not real sure. But there you have it. All right, I'll put that to keep the speaker from flopping around. And then up at the top, the other place that it unscrews is right here. Now this lets you in right between the LED and the recharge port, and the wires are all bunched up right there. There's quick disconnects on here on this side, down here, head into the button and the recharge port. Up here we have, I can't really show it to you too well, but there's a metal heat sink held in place with a screw, and there's some thermal paste up there. But the wires in this section are pretty tight, as you can see by how little space there is up here for the LED module. I would highly recommend that you not unscrew yours right there, because there's all kinds of potential for damage doing it. But again, if you're not careful when you're taking off the emitter, you'll unscrew it further down than you intend to. So that's the design. In terms of features, one AV button here, one recharge port right here, set screw for the LED, set screw for the blade, sometimes depending on the emitter, 2 set screws for the blade. It's a pretty nice design. It's got 4 little grips in here for your hand. I put a textured grip on this one because I found that it works a whole lot better, and it also keeps me from accidentally unscrewing that extra joint up there, or right there, that I didn't want to unscrew. So, pretty nice design, pretty thin actually as well. If you see, my smallest saber that I own is my Vader's Vault Tempest right here. And this is roughly just a little bit wider in diameter than a Vader's Vault Tempest, which is the thinnest saber that I've ever seen. So this is thinner than an Ultra Sabers. It's actually very much on par with an early Ultra Sabers V2. So it's good for contact work. It's good for people who don't have particularly big hands. It's a nice long hilt, so it works for things like hand rolls. You have enough room to roll the hand around and catch without having to pop it into the air to do that. So it's a nice saber for contact. In terms of durability, like I said, that little bit in the end was held in with glue. There's a couple of other things. There's a slight rattle that you hear up towards the top. I believe that's the glass optic. And there's a slight rattle that you hear down towards the bottom. That's that speaker. Really nothing to be concerned about, but it has that sort of slight rattle that's a little bit worrying. Alright, so let me go ahead and fire this up, and I'll start talking about features and the way that it works. So the one AV button, quick tap turns the saber on. Quick tap turns the saber off. Okay, when the saber's on, we have motion sounds and we have blade lockup. To get to the blade lockup, we just hold the button down until the blade starts to lock up. And we also have a flash on clash. I'll show you all of those. Alright, there's a little bit of motion. There's the flash on clash. And there's the blade lockup. So you notice the blade lockup just takes whatever color the saber currently is and it flashes that color. The flash on clash is a double white flash with a dead spot in the middle, which is exactly the same as a kyber light. I'm not real fond of it because of that dead spot in the middle, but it is what it is. Most other sabers, most higher end sabers that you're going to see on the market, their flash on clash goes from the standard blade color to the flash and then back to the standard blade color, without that dead spot in the middle. The only two I've seen with the dead spot in the middle are this one and the kyber light. So there were some of the features that you saw. It's not the best soundboard, but it's pretty competitive for the price, really. It's better than a Kyberlite soundboard, not as good as an Ultra Sabers. The sound is about on par with some of the stuff I've seen from Saberforge. So not too bad. In terms of sound fonts and features, when the Saber is off, if we hold down the button, the little AV switch will begin to flash. When it's flashing, we can cycle through the sound fonts. Caliban font. Caliban has sort of a monster roar to it. It's actually kind of a neat font. I'll go ahead and fire that up. To get out of the menu, I just hold down the button till it stops flashing. So Caliban, Sentinel. Sentinel is an interesting font. It has a high-pitched whine behind it, but that's actually kind of neat. It's what I would prefer on this red one. But so you could hear that sort of sound of crickets in the background there, if you could hear it over my clock. Okay, there's a silent font. Now one of the other things that's in here is there's a little vibration motor in here, and when you trigger the silent font, it actually just signals the vibration motor, so a lot like a phone on silent. That same vibration motor actually triggers when you're doing blade lockup as well. And they have this last one. I don't know what the name of this last one is, but it kind of has that energy sword look or sound to the boot up. This is the one that was on there when I turned it on the first time. All right, so I'll go ahead and leave that one on. Now, the other thing about it, so we've got 3 sound fonts and 1 mute font. When it's on the mute font, the flash on clash is deactivated, so it's just a solid blade color at that point. When it's on any of the fonts, though, a double tap of the AV button while the Saber is on cycles through the 16 preset colors. There we go. All right, so a lot of blues and greens in there, not a lot in the red, orange, yellow spectrum comparatively. Nothing in the white range I've noticed, which is kind of odd, but 16 presets cycle through with the double tap. You noticed also that that double tap, it's easy to do it wrong and actually turn the Saber off unintentionally. But not too bad, pretty good on the fly. Just a little bit about brightness. Whenever I compare the brightness on the Saber and talk about it, everybody always says, but what about Vader's Vault? Because Vader's Vault has this reputation for being the brightest in the industry. I've done a lot of comparisons before where I've shown that Vader's Vault is really about on par with everybody else. But for the sake of argument, I've decided that from now on, whenever I do a brightness test, I'll do it against a Vader's Vault, just so that I stop getting those messages. But anyhow, here we go in green. And here's a Vader's Vault in green. But there you go. You can see that the brightness is actually pretty comparative. It's a slight different setup. Vader's Vault is running a tri-cree. This is running a quad-core, but in that case that I just gave you there, only the green dye was illuminated. So that was a pretty fair test you saw between the two. Depending on which side of my body it was on, there's some light over here that isn't over here. That's why I switched it. But pretty comparative between the two. So let's talk about the other things that come with this. The blade that this thing comes with is a dual diffused blade, which basically means that they took a standard diffused blade and they sanded the outside so that the light comes all the way to the edge. Okay, pretty nice blade. They're standard 32 inches. They have a pretty deep blade tip though that goes all the way down to here. Not necessarily a big fan of that, but it does mean it's not going to fall out or break. So it's pretty stable, but it gives you this sort of weirdly illuminated bit at the front. Rounded tip, pretty durable, mid-grade, not dual or not full dual, but it's interchangeable with pretty much any blade manufacturer's blade, so you can pop whatever you want in there. Other things that this came with, the saber sheath. Now this was an interesting idea, and I have to admit was a pretty big selling point. Okay, it's got a dragon on it, it's made out of wood, it's painted, it's got a belt clip over here. Pretty neat idea, and it gives you the ability to do a draw on the blade. A lot of the videos that they had of this, they were drawing on ignition, which was pretty cool. The problem with it is that the belt clip is way down here, which means that if you do clip this to your belt, you're drawing from way up here this thing is practically neck level at this point for the pommel, which looks pretty strange when walking around with it. This is really neat though for just packing around or finding a different way to connect it to your belt. I don't recommend the belt clip, I'm not a big fan of that, but I do like this sheath quite a bit. The sheath is actually deep enough as well that it fits a 36-inch blade, so you don't have to just use their 32. Another interesting thing that came with this is the Saber carry bag. Now this thing has a shoulder strap, it's pleather, it's got their little Wonderforce logo on it. The hilts actually go down in this pocket right here. It can hold 2 hilts. Accessories fit up here, and blades go in the top, so it can hold 2 blades. So you can actually carry 2 setups around in this. So it's a really nice little bag. Pretty handy. It's very similar to a pool cue bag. The other thing that came with this was the staff coupler. I've coated the staff coupler in the same material I used for the grip. This thing actually makes a pretty kick-ass staff, all things told. I find I really like this claw emitter for balance. It gives you some weight right here to play around with. Lets you do flips and the like. But staff coupler works just like the pommels. Vented holes down in the middle there. So, all things told, that's the Wonderforce Saber, or the Pock Store Hitoren. It's a pretty versatile saber. It's nice and slim. I like it. It holds up pretty well. It's not as fancy as a lot of other models, and it's not very canon. It's kind of plain by comparison, but it has a lot of parts and a lot of versatility. And if you're looking for a working saber, this is a pretty decent option. Hopefully this review has been of use to you. If it has, please join me back for more.